Hello, everyone, and welcome to this 28th Urban AI conversation. My name is Hubert Beroche, and I'm the founder of Urban AI. It's a great pleasure of welcoming you today for this Urban AI conversation, to which we have the pleasure and honor of welcoming Nataliya Kosmyna, research scientist at MIT Media Lab, also CEO of Brainy Corporation. We will discuss actually some of her fascinating research, including the latest one, your brain on ChatGPT, but also some of her work on human-computer interfaces using non-invasive brain interfaces. Just before we start the discussion, a few words about Urban AI. Urban AI is a global organization dedicated to the emerging field of urban artificial intelligence. We federate a community of 200 worldwide international experts working at the intersection of AI and city. We also have a think tank with which we are doing research, with which we are doing events, research in this field of urban AI. And lastly, we have a consulting branch with which we help urban stakeholders navigating the ongoing AI evolution. For this urban AI conversation, as usual, we will first have a 20-minute presentation from our speaker, Nataliya Kosmyna, then 20 minutes conversation. Nataliya, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. And thank you so much for having me for this talk. Happy morning, afternoon, everyone. The presentation is going to be in English, but again, there will be some questions in the very end in French. We'll be happy to respond to those as well. So consider this is my disclosure slide. You already did the intro, but this is just, for full transparency, some of the companies, nonprofits I'm working with, companies who supported the work throughout the years of my work on brain-computer interfaces. And I guess an important note here, because we're going to be talking, maybe at least briefly, talking about the paper, of course. The paper does talk about search engine, which is Google. And I do want to highlight that I'm currently visiting research at Google, so the work was done long before I actually joined. So just, again, for full transparency and disclosure reasons. But let's get back to the cool stuff. And yeah, that's a pretty brutal, I guess, move. But this is, all those exhibits we might see in some of the museums, right? Which we might also be exhibits sometime later, right? Our history, throughout our history, we actually are able to follow our evolution. And we have, with almost each week or month, new and new discoveries to, these are just some of the highlights of our evolution as human species. And of course, all of that in part, right, like with the theory of Darwin, is due to the technology, right? Some of the development definitely brought our species as we know right now. And of course, I would argue that we are moving forward. Technology definitely moves us forward in this development. And of course, I do want to mention that we are right now, I guess, somewhere here. I call this Homo smartphonicus. And this is, again, of course, my vocabulary here. We are looking into something like Homo cognitivus artificialis. And I guess we are all heading more here in Robo sapiens. And Robo sapiens, right, of course, it's ultimately where potentially technology will make or break us, right? But I want to bring us very quickly back. Well, maybe not very quickly, that's like 3,000 years BC, right? So where it all started, right? And of course, handwriting, right? Something that we know very well right now. And typewriting, 1874, almost 2,000 years later. But interestingly, just last year, we had a paper from the colleagues who discovered that handwriting, but not typewriting, leads to widespread brain connectivity. Basically, when you write by hand, you have more special memory activations, you remember things better. It's just overall good for learning. And if we continue this evolution, right, we're going to go in the printing press. We'll be nowhere right now without this one as well, right, 1440. And of course, now with this, premise of all of the books and everything actually that could be written is in our pockets, like literally just here, right? Again, a paper, just from couple years ago, in this case, from 4 years ago, again, looked into what happens to our brain when we are doing paper notebooks, using paper notebooks versus mobile devices, specifically brain activation differences during memory retrieval. So this is, again, just 4 years ago, right? And of course, GPS, right? One of the most commonly used systems right now, 1973. And again, just several years prior, 2020, we looked in the use of GPS and the fact that it can be used negatively actually for the special memory. So this specific paper did a retest of the participants 3 years later after the initial use of GPS and showed that there is a diminishing in the special memory, right? We do lose a bit on a way of navigating the space. And of course, you might have also heard about very famous studies on London taxi drivers and others, right? So there is a cost of using these technologies. And finally, last but not least, of course, 1998. Google, like we really would not even have conversation in part because of this technology right now. And a very famous paper from 2008, Your Brain on Google, actually looked into the use of internet and what are the patterns of activation when you use an internet. And they compared actually savvy users, so those who already were trained to use internet, versus the novices, so the beginners. And they did show that obviously there is a huge difference, and it actually is interesting only when you are trained to use the system, right? You will have this more widespread connectivity again. But let's get back to the brain, right? Of course, again, the most efficient of the systems, of the computers that you have and I have, there is not a single one that can match energy-wise right now on the planet, and it will stay this case for quite some time. Just 20 watts used by your brain for all of time of compute that is needed to happen, right? So for all of the operations. Compare this to just one query if you do a regular Google search. And of course, compare this to the recently reported May 2025 OpenAI's report on their use per query for the ChatGPT. But at the same time, we are getting these headlines from some of the CEOs, right? AI will replace most of the workforce, but question is, and what we had in the lab some time ago, what will happen to those of us who will remain in school and jobs, whose jobs will not be replaced by AI, right? And so that's what we did actually at the lab. So we ran a study, and the paper that we call the study, we call this Your Brain on ChatGPT. We call it ChatGPT because that's the LLM, the large language models that we have used in the study. That's why it's very important to notice that I'm not singling out ChatGPT as specific example. It's just the ones that we used in the paper. I do believe that we would not find specific differences if we take any other, but that's the ones that we used in the paper nevertheless. So what did we do actually? We invited 54 students from Greater Boston area, from the schools in Greater Boston area. So we had schools like MIT, we had schools like Harvard, Tufts, Wellesley, and we asked them to perform a very specific task. And that was an essay writing, so super specific task. And we divided them in these 3 groups. One group was only allowed to use ChatGPT, so they could use it as they seem pleased. They didn't have a specific instruction on, for example, just use it for this or that type of query, request, or prompt. You use it as you see fit. Second group was allowed to use internet search. So in this case, it was Google without the AI functionality. That one, right now that you have on top of your any search on page that summarizes everything. And then the third one was the brain only group. So that group, as you might guess, we call it also in the paper, tools free group, was not allowed to use anything else. And so in these cases, we will have these three groups. So they couldn't use anything else for the brain only. Internet search, you can use internet as you see, please, but you cannot go on any type of LLM supported chatbot websites, and ChatGPT, it's only ChatGPT. And of course, the idea would be to see what happens to your brain when you use ChatGPT. Is this promise really true? And, you really is gaining in performance and productivity, just to look overall what actually is happening, right? The protocol and the details, I will obviously not have time to go through all the details, but in the paper you have all the details, but I will just give you the two most important highlights. We had 3 sessions for the experiment. So participants were coming for all 3 sessions. And then we had a final 4th session. Only 18 subjects, which is very important, came back to for the 4th session. So, and the 4th session was slightly different from the first 3 sessions. And in these first 3 sessions, the task stayed the same for all 4, but in the first 3, we actually gave subjects choice for their essays. So first of all, we obviously didn't want to get subjects in trouble of writing about something that they have no idea about. Like, imagine I'm going to ask you to write something about brain-computer interfaces, but the best you heard about those were from the movie Matrix. You're like, I don't know what those are. So it will be very, very disadvantageous, right? So what we actually did, we gave them topics which are like high-level topics, like philanthropy or happiness or perfect society. So something that you are able to write about or discuss without any prior knowledge. And then we actually additionally decided to make it even easier on them and gave them choice of 3 topics to choose from, all same for each of the subjects for each of the sessions. So let's say you come first time, we're gonna give you choice of perfect society, happiness, and philanthropy. For the second time, you're gonna choice of the other 3 topics, and for the third time, you're gonna have a choice of other 3 topics. 4th session, as I mentioned, was slightly different. In that session, we actually do the swap. So if you, like Hubert, for example, you were not our participant, but if you were our participant and you were originally assigned to the ChatGPT group, for the 4th session, we would actually take away your access. So you would come for the 4th session, you would actually not know that, but when you came over, you would have gotten your brain-only group assignment now. So now you need to write your essay without any help of any tools. And vice versa was also true. If you, Hubert, for example, you were our participant who was originally in the brain-only group, then I would actually, for the 4th session, get you access to ChatGPT. So now you can write your essay using ChatGPT. And the final thing that you need to know is that we actually gave you not the choice of new 3 topics, like, so it's gonna be again a full surprise for you for your essays, but we gave you the choice of the topics you had already written about yourself. So these were personalized. So for example, if you picked up topic A, D, and G, for example, for your sessions previously, these would be the topics that you would see as choices for your 4th session. And again, there are more details obviously about the protocol, so I refer you to the paper if you need to know more. So we're gonna go and I'm gonna really quickly cover just some of the highlights. And I will separate them in 3 main findings, basically what we actually have recorded in the study. So first of all, we recorded brain activity of our participants using EEG or electroencephalography. This is a non-invasive way of recording brain activity. Second, we analyzed the outputs, the essays themselves, right? So we did natural language processing. And then lastly, we also did the interviews. So we asked participants after each session took place, after each essay writing, took place, a couple of questions. So I'm going to highlight a couple of the findings. Let's start with EEG. So what we measured are, you might have heard, maybe you haven't, what we measured is called brain connectivity, and specific measure in the paper, it actually explained in more depth, called DDTF, dynamic direct transfer function. And this is a fancy way of, in layperson terms, explaining if, for example, I'm talking right now, let's say just to Hubert, and Hubert gets back and talks back to me. So we know who talks to who, so directionality, and also where is talking happening. So that's what we measured. So how much talking is happening? Did I just say hi, hello, bonjour, Hubert? Or did I just continue talking? And how much talking and directionality. So how much flow of data also went. So in this case, like I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. So this is alpha band power. And again, in the paper, we have all of them, right? And these are effectively in the literature, right? We obviously looked into some of those and what they stand for, right? So in case of the alpha band power, there is a lot of internal processing, and a lot of alpha band power analysis was also highlighted in creative writing, actually, tasks before our paper. So that's why I decided to bring it here for you. So here what you can see, obviously it's animated one, doesn't have sound, but hopefully the lines you can see okay. And if not, again, the paper also has, this is the first figure in the paper in case you don't see the lines very well that are animated here. So you see several lines, right? These are those lines that I mentioned that represent this connectivity, right? These networks, right? So what was talking to who in the brain and where this talking was happening. So here you can see obviously different colors, and you might guess, but obviously I will tell that for you, colors that are yellow and red, and obviously the thickness of the colors actually represents the significance, right? So these are the most important. And you can see again, visually, I'm going to just help you in case it's not very, very clear. Brain, so the last one, has the most widespread connectivity and the biggest number of these lines, right? Google, so search engine in the middle here, also has quite a few. And the LLM, in our case, ChatGPT, has the fewest of them. I'm going to show you another one. So this is going to be a still image, so it might be easier to look, right? And this is another band power, just again for the sheer example. And this is a figure taken directly from the paper, so you can look again at it in the paper if you want to. And important to know, right? So just to help you understand, so what are you exactly looking at? Is logically just think about the task, right? If you have a task where you have a help, right? A direct help, something like ChatGPT, versus you have a task where you need to look for information, like search engine. So you need to look this information in different parts, then kind of assemble it to process, assemble it together. And then you have a task where you have no help whatsoever. So you need to come up with everything by yourself, right? With you need to remember things, remember the references, think about all of that, right? Just logically, think where you would see the most connectivity, just logically, right? I'm not gonna right now, I guess, because we're in the webinar for you, so you might not be able to respond to me, but you can obviously type your response, right? So I'm gonna like give you this example pairwise, right? So if you compare help, when you had help, versus when you didn't have any help, again, where would you see more connectivity, even if you know nothing about the brain? And I'm going to give you the response here in the brain. You would see more connectivity in the brain, which is, again, in itself not surprising. You had no help whatsoever. You needed to come up with that essay yourself, plan it, execute it, have the structure to it, maybe come up with your own examples, so remember those from your personal experiences. Versus when you had help, right? You had a lot of things most of the things were delivered to you already. Now let's take another example. Again, another type of help, like search engine. It's a help, right? It's maybe not directly giving you that essay, but it's a help. It gives you a lot, right? Versus, again, no help. Where would you see more connectivity, even if you know exactly nothing about the brain? Here you go. Again, you would see more connectivity in the brain compared in the search engine. You would see much less of this connectivity. Again, not surprising. And then let's compare and again, you can also type your response, right? We will look into them afterwards in the chat. If you have two types of help, right? One, when everything is delivered to you, one where you need to do the search yourself, so to have some integration with information, where do you think you would see more connectivity? Here you go, right? So this is just to show you that in itself, right, we are not measuring any type of IQ, any type of broken connections. We want to analyze exactly which areas are more active, so to say, in layperson terms, and what happens, right? And where the information again flows, directionality, from like front of your head to the back of your head to the sides of your head, right? Because all of these areas do have their own function, right? So some of them are very active for language processing. Some of them are very active when we know that you have imagination processes, etc., etc. So that's what we are trying to understand. But the interesting thing happened, of course, in the session 4, right? Session 4 was, it's interesting because we switched the group. So you used, in this case, again, brain before, and then you got access to ChatGPT, or you had ChatGPT and then you lost access and you now used your brain. So let me show you here. The results are very interesting. Again, these are the figures taken from the paper directly. So here is the group that what you see here, session 1, 2, 3 were just people who only used brain only. But session 4, as a reminder, this last line here, are people who before used ChatGPT and now use brain, right? So you can see here that the connections, right, it just visually, they're the weakest, right? So it really closely matches the very first session, but it never fits sessions 2 and 3. So meaning that overall, and that obviously this is just one of the band powers I'm showing you. In the paper, you have all of them, right? So what it means is when you use ChatGPT and then lost access to it, your brain connectivity was significantly lower than that of the people who use just their brain. But now let's look at the ChatGPT group. So here the principle will be the same. You will see first 3 sessions by folks who just use ChatGPT, and the 4th session will be people who use ChatGPT, but before, for 3 times, they have been using just their brain. Let's look at that. You see what happens? So if you used first your brain and then you regained access to ChatGPT after using your brain in the task, your brain connectivity is significantly higher than that of the brain-only group. So what it can potentially mean is that timing might be very critical. So let's say if you haven't developed a skill or at least understanding of the knowledge, most likely if you just getting thrown a tool on you like ChatGPT, like another LLM, most likely you will not do as well, as good if you first develop the skill, at least to some extent. Maybe you haven't become the expert, but you developed the skill and then you gained access to a tool like ChatGPT, and now you are using this tool to help you and support you in your tasks. But of course, this was just the brain connectivity, right? It was not, again, a specific understanding of IQ or laziness. But of course, other measures in the paper actually gave us a bit more of the insight. And actually, that insight is very worrisome, if I were to say so. So let me give you just a couple of the highlights from the NLP, so natural language processing. So here, what happens is I'm going to show you just group 4, right? Again, paper has much more, but this is folks who used first ChatGPT, then they switched to the brain group. The topic was forethought. And so what happens here, I'm showing you the 4th session. And these are all different anagrams, all different words people were using. And what you can see here is that there is a clear reuse of the vocabulary from the time those people were actually writing their essays with ChatGPT. Now, when they stopped using it, they have no more access, they reuse the same vocabulary. And you would say, well, okay, so what's wrong about that? I picked up some words and now I'm reusing it. Yeah, but it's also where those words are coming from, right? So I'm gonna stick to this. So we're gonna come back to the forethought example. Another example on NLP is, you might have heard it as if you're looking into AI. Specifically, it's called NER, or Named Entity Recognition. So what these are is what LLMs are very famous for, and they're excellent in doing this. All of these dates, names, like all of these capitals and all of this information that we humans actually have harder time usually to remember, they're gonna throw all of these specifics on you. So you can see here for the ChatGPT, extremely high use of NERs. So you can see everywhere for all of the topics. Search engine has significantly lesser number of these NERs used. And then when you look in the brain, of course, you do have the use, but it is actually much lower. Another example I'm going to give you is the use again of the vocabulary in another topic, which is happiness. So you see here in blue, ChatGPT. In orange, you see the brain. And in red, you see the search engine. And again, these are the engrams. And you can see they're actually not really intersecting. They're really in their own clusters very visually. But what I'm going to highlight to you, because obviously that's not very readable for you from the screen, but again, this is all in the paper, what those words are. So the topic, again, it's here on top of the slide, happiness. Keep this in mind. And now look at the words used by each group. So we have ChatGPT people using vocabulary related to career. So all of those little clusters, this is all about career. And again, who am I to judge what makes you happy? If career makes you happy, that's awesome, right? Like it's, and moreover, don't forget, these were school students, right? They are definitely thinking about career among other things. But again, those other two groups were also students, right? So it's again, all students here. Students who used search engines, so the red one, right, talked a lot about give us. So I guess a lot of giving was happening there. And we will get back also, like, you're like, what, why? What's happening here? Don't worry, we're gonna get to it in a second. But then look at the middle, the orange-yellow cluster. That is brain only. And they talked about true happiness. So a lot of vocabulary related to happiness and true happiness. And again, these are all, well, we would argue, very same pool of students, right? So it's not like, oh, well, it's students, of course I will talk about career. Interestingly, LLM served them this vocabulary, unlike for the other two groups. And just as an example, just, you know, how your brain looks when you write about happiness, again, this is in the paper, but just showing you how much connectivity happens when you actually in the brain group and you write about happiness versus how much of that is different when you use LLM and search engine. And now let's look at another example. And this is the vocabulary related to the topic of philanthropy. And so here is a green one we're going to look at. And this is search engine. And look, obviously you cannot potentially read very well, but I can pronounce it for you. The topic, the vocabulary there is heavily about homeless. We have homeless person, homeless person, etc., etc., etc. Very heavy use. This vocabulary, you can see, had not been actually intertwined with like red or blue anywhere, and red and blue are LLM group and a brain only group. So this is really unique to search engine, to the Google group. And when you look at the keyword planner, right, so the words that you can pay to actually get the ads promoted, look what is trending right now. Homeless, right? So that's exactly what we actually talk about the paper, that ending of the paper, which is a discussion section where you have a huge gray box, which I highlight the vocabularies that went into the title of the paper, which is cognitive debt. A lot of people thought that in cognitive debt, I really mean just the brain findings, right? But actually, I meant all of the findings here, and specifically the idea that the vocabularies that you are using are really heavily coming from all these different algorithms that are, of course, owned by these big corporations. And LLMs are absolutely no exception. So if you're thinking that you came up with this word, think twice. You might have most likely been served this word and this vocabulary, depending on where you are located, what is the interest, what is the current trending situation in your region specifically. And finally, last but not least, for the NLP part, of course, a lot of people asked, okay, but what did people ask of ChatGPT, right? Did they really all ask, write my essay or something? No, actually, you can see that a lot of them ask directly essay writing requests. There were very few information seeking requests and very few of inquiry and discussion. So this is everything on the left side. But what happened, look what happened when people first used their brain, right? And then went into that fourth session. and started using ChatGPT, we see that now 2 times less requests for just write the essay showed up, but we had 4 times more of information seeking. So you would actually ask questions, a lot of clarifying questions. And you can see almost double of different inquiries and discussions. So where people gave their opinion and asked ChatGPT to, work from this opinion or give them opposite opinions, etc., etc. Again, this figure is also in the paper, so you can go and read explanation it further. And finally, and I'm almost done here, last but not least, definitely, is of course the interviews. Those are considered to be subjective, right? And of course, but I do think they are very, very interesting. I'm gonna give you just 2 highlights for the sake of time, which are responses to requests for quotes and some of the ownership requests. So first of all, here, a huge bar, and this is an example where it's not good to be in that huge bar. So this is an example of students who could not quote, percentage of students who couldn't quote after first session their essay. So, and of course, I was not asking to quote the whole essay. I asked for any quote, any short beginning, any place in the essay. And mind that this question of can you give me a quote was asked 60 seconds after the essay was turned in. Not a day, not a week, not a month. 60 seconds essay was turned in. This was the question. Can you give any quote, shortest? Maybe it's a 3-word quote, just any quote. That was not the case, as you can see, with Google and Brain Only. They had some struggle, but it was definitely much less of the struggle. Important, of course, it's session 1, right? So, of course, students logically improved for sessions 2, 3, and 4 because, surprise, surprise, they also knew what we're going to be asking for other sessions, right? They learned the lesson. But also here is the percentage of correct quotes. So you can see out of those 17% that remain from previous diagrams that were able to give a quote, 0 actually were able to give a correct quote, so verbatim quote. Of course, that was not the case again for the search engine and so for the Brain Only. Again, it's session 1, they did all improve, but trend remained. Very important for both cases. ChatGPT group struggled with both correct quotes and inability to quote throughout all 4 sessions. And then finally, last but not least, is of course the ownership. Here it's important to see the first violet section portion of the ChatGPT, which says no ownership. It's almost 15% who pointed that they don't feel any ownership towards their essays. And you would say, and a lot of people actually said also in the comments, well, surprise, surprise, they haven't written it, right? So why would they actually feel any ownership towards it? But that's also where, the challenge might come from, right? If you don't feel anything towards this essay, you cannot even remember it, right? So of course, what relationship with that material, what, critical thinking can you actually develop based on that exercise like essay writing? And of course, as I said, throughout the presentation, there is so much more details. All the figures I mentioned are in the paper. There's all discussions in the paper, all explanations if you missed it. Everything can be found in the paper. And there's also a website where we explain each figure. It's in high resolution on the website. So you can go zoom, not just in PDF, but you can go zoom in each figure, looking at each explanation, and of course ask any questions. There's also an FAQ that we explain a lot of limitations. As I mentioned in the very beginning, it is a very specific population, it's a very specific task. It's, of course, we only used one LLM, very specific LLM, which was ChatGPT. And of course, the sample size is arguably very limited. So this is all, a work that is in progress, and of course much more is to be done. Thank you for your time. Hopefully we have some time for questions.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nataliya, for the fascinating presentation, for also achieving the challenge of actually sharing so many insights in such a short amount of time. That's really truly fascinating topic, and actually especially happy of having you today, not only for this research, and we will definitely discuss it, but also some of your works you're doing on brain-computer interfaces. But maybe just before, I might have some questions if you agree to explore further some insights you shared, especially on this concept of cognitive depth.
Yes.
and just before, sorry, on the link of this video, we will obviously share the link of the paper and of the website. So if you're looking on YouTube, you have it in the comments. On this concept of cognitive depth, you just also discussed actually the kind of lexical standardization between different categories. Um, so does it mean that we could also expect a kind of thought homogenization from such observation, or is it not necessarily the case?
Of course, again, based on even our limited studies that I mentioned has a lot of these different limitations. We still show that you have this homogenization, right? You have the same vocabulary being reused, very specific vocabulary that you would say actually does not compare to that same population, by the way, taking the same task, but writing about, happiness compared to career choices in the topic of happiness, or being served, again, very specific vocabulary, right? So we do talk in the paper, we do mention actually it's also state of the art in the paper about echo chambers, for those who might have heard the concept, meaning that it's not coming from the void, right? We know already from a lot of previous research that again we highlight in, cite in our quote in our paper, that there is a bias, and that bias is of course very, very dangerous. Those training sets, not that they are also based on the stolen, information, that, the actual owners do not have, any credit for it, but also the bias came with the data, of course, right? And of course, in the addition, don't forget that manipulation is very easy. We saw literally a month and a half ago, one of the billionaires, I don't want to even mention the name, but we know, of course, who I'm talking about, who owns a social media website, and then, of course, owns an AI company with their own LLM system, suggested that maybe they need to rewrite the whole history to fix errors, right? And question, and it's great that you're bringing my work on brain-computer interfaces, how long before that same billionaire, who, by the way, also owns an implant company, will decide that we will need to rewrite our thoughts and fix our thoughts that are, by the way, already being manipulated, right? That we literally showed in our research. And a lot of, again, other colleagues are, of course, showing in their research. A paper from, I believe it was out 3 weeks after our paper, so I believe June 30, also on a preprint service like arXiv. So same from Max Planck, so Germany. I believe analyzed 100,000 people's interactions based on YouTube and other services like TikTok, and they also found this reuse of vocabulary, right? But just reuse, and again, it's not even as dangerous as, again, where it comes from, and more importantly, right, what it takes out, right? As an example of that, Carnegie Mellon paper, this is already a peer-reviewed paper, talks about, from several months ago, talks about the specific recipes from India, so a specific region, I believe, in India. And then when these recipes are being asked for in an LLM like ChatGPT, the spices that are used in those recipes, right? And we French people are also very particular about our recipes. I mean, I'm pretty sure all the cultures. But so imagine if we will have all of these spices now being fully, simplified, like just black pepper and salt, right? So you are taking also cultural, differences and uniqueness and beauty for what we actually travel and we love, connecting with other people. You will just simplify and make it all average, right? And so what is gonna be staying behind? Everyone will be the same, all average Joe, average Jane, average Francois, whatever is your regular name, right, in your country. That's what we're gonna end up having. But I'm pretty sure no one actually wants that. Except, of course, there is a great idea, as a lot of people, I'm not gonna go there, that it's obviously very convenient if population has very average opinion you can manipulate and control. And as I said, some of the owners of some of those companies would definitely be interested, clearly based on their actions and comments on their social media. So I think we need to be very, very careful about that. That being said, doesn't mean that tool cannot help you with language, right? Translation, I don't know if you remember, I remember the times like Google Translate was with so many mistakes, right? Like 10, 12 years ago, it was like, oh, what a nonsense, right? Now it's perfect, right? It's great, but again, that all comes with the price, right? Cognitive debt. There is no free cheese, and as far as you know the price, it's up to you to use the tool, right? But the problem is that some people might just know the price and not have the understanding, especially if it demands this understanding from someone who's younger, who is a teenager, who is a child, who is born with this technology. And I think this is where a lot of danger does come in.
You also show actually that this kind of thought manipulation, in a sense, it's not only, you just said it from LLM, but also actually from, like, for example, users of Google, with the example of homeless, which is actually super interesting. So what could be the solution, basically, not at the individual, well, maybe both actually. What could be the solution at the individual level, but also at the systemic level?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, again, Google specifically, like this echo chambers in Google, very well studied and reported. We report them, some of the papers, there is much, much more actually. Some of those we report in our paper. And the idea here is to understand that what could be done is, of course, well, we have several, obviously legal frameworks for that. So first of all, huge shout out, of course, to European Union, right? I'm just full transparency French, so but there are obviously some great laws, right, that are being pushed through to protect, to ensure that this is not really pushed aggressively on users who are based in European Union. But of course, that's not the case. These types of protections don't really exist here, which is very, very important to highlight, and in a lot of other countries. So of course, like, just, and it's not perfect, right? It doesn't mean that European Union just built a perfect protection set. As I highlight, there is no cognitive GDPR that exists, right, when we are talking about it. So I think it's very important to have also, from personal perspective, not to over rely obviously on the law and things that, oh, I'm in France, I'm good, I'm in Germany, I live in Germany, I'm good. There's definitely good, strong protections, but I think that also having a healthy use is very, very important, right? Do you necessarily need to use a specific product, right? There are a lot of great services that are alternative services, right? And there is a lot of definite different email clients, a lot of other things, right? Think about each time you click on accept without reading those 55 pages, right? What are you accepting? For all of your data to be sucked in. That's what you're accepting. They already have a lot of data, like, really. But this is final frontier of all of our data. So do you really need to enable that agent? It's not going to really help. I guarantee it's not going to really help in your tasks, but it's going to really get access to all of your emails, to all of your photos, to all of your banking information. And guess what's going to happen? There will be a leak of data. Like, how many emails are we getting each week? I think there's an email saying, well, sorry, we got a leak of data. Oh, I'm sorry, we got another leak of data. Oh, your password leaked. Oh, your address leaked, etc., right? So this is something we need to consider, right? Healthy use. Do you really need, like, what are you really gaining to give out the remaining, peanuts, right? Your breadcrumbs of your privacy. Really, is there any, you cannot book the ticket yourself, right? That plane ticket, right? Can you just not plan your Parisian, tour yourself using the websites, and maybe, people who are following, who went to Paris, right, etc. Really, do you need to give this agent all of that information that is gonna get back to you and manipulate you? Of course, because guess what? The whole idea is to make you a customer, right? That's why, obviously, that's one of the dangers to start it so early in the classroom, right? Not that it being pushed so aggressively in the classroom for all the different reasons, of course, I talk heavily about, but also, hey, if you started using it when you were 10, guess what's going to happen when you are 18? You're going to continue using the product. And surprise, surprise, now you are 18, you are adult legally. It's not going to be for free for you anymore. And even if it is for free, right? Again, what I just said before, there is no free cheese and there is no cognitive credit card. You're not going to be able to write off this debt. And the price might be just a bit too high and too steep.
So, and just before then, Nancy, I will ask a question, but I might have just a final question on this. If I may ask you, what is your personal use then of those technology. I'm asking, or let's say, what would you recommend, like in terms of trade-off, like, because indeed, as you said it, there's a cost. You said it, that was one of your first
I full,
yeah.
yeah, full transparency. I am not using LLMs right now. I try? Absolutely. I tried. We tried for even for this paper for state of the art. It failed miserably. And guess how I knew? Literally on the first line of state of the art, it hallucinated a very famous paper that I know because I'm the expert. I cited that paper many, many, many times. So I knew the name and the date very well. And I'm like, oh, it's literally first line. So I took a screenshot and I went with it. So I'm personally not using it whatsoever. I don't need it. I'm gonna type with and mistype in my email. Well, I think that's it, right? No one ever came back to me and said, instead of and, you type ANS, right? Or something like that. Or I forgot accent some like specific letters, some specific, saying no one ever came back for me about that. I'm pretty sure if someone comes back to you on that, maybe don't have any correspondence with those people. Again, if it makes you more empowered because you really want perfect grammar, it's not your native language, just feel more comfortable. Yeah, props to you, go for it. But do you really need to sacrifice like 7 trees, 1 gallon of water for that one query of email? How did you do it 3 years ago? Like in the beginning of 2022? How did you write your emails, right? So that's one thing. So I don't use it. That's first thing. At least for now, it never helped me in the ways that I couldn't have done it myself better, right? So that's a thing. And second, even for use of the systems like, search engines, things like that, I have very specific use of the systems. I do have very separate, have multiple, and I know what I'm going to say is obviously very specific. A lot of people do that, but it also does require some additional budget, which might be a bit harder for people. But I have very separate phone that is for work, for personal. I have a computer that is personal, for work. I clearly separate. I never ever mix them up. Do I travel? Once I traveled with 4 computers. Is it awful? It's heavy. Yes, it is heavy. But yes, I don't need to be top of some line, but that's the case, right? You have clear separation, private mode, not protection by any means, but private mode is great. I'm not tired of retyping those passwords. I don't necessarily need my history to be remembered and all the other things. But I can talk about this for like 12 hours, and some of the choices are definitely more extreme, but that's, clear separation of some of these things is necessary. And is it gonna really protect fully? Oh, absolutely not. Again, you should not be fooled that the fact that you're gonna get 25 extra devices is gonna make things easier. It actually makes things sometimes longer, and you do need to pay attention more, but it does have at least the separation. Also mentally, it's actually very rewarding when you have the separation. Sometimes obviously a lot of jobs actually require that regardless, so I do recommend leaning into that. And again, just realize, when do you truly need it and how much are you giving out, right? We saw with our paper, it was fed in so many LLM generated LLM chatbots, right? And it hallucinated all times. At all times, there was at least several issues. But forget about the paper that is publicly available, right? Think about personal document. Some professional document you are doing, and also how much are you missing out by doing this in this way? Like, do you need a summary of this book? Books are amazing. Okay, I'm not paid by any library to say that books are amazing. From the brain perspective, I gave you in the beginning the overview. I love public libraries. I love libraries. And I go to the libraries actually very often. So the idea is, read a book. Like, do you need a summary of the book? You need to just know real quick what it is about. Okay, yeah, you learn that this book is about. You can also learn on the back of the book what it is actually about, right? So you didn't learn anything, any lessons from that book, fictional or professional, right? So same here. What do you need it? Give it more information about yourself and about your job. Do you really want to do that? Again, and if you do and you need, because it really helps you, makes you more confident, you have difficulties with learning, props to you, go for it, but just know what you're doing, be very vigilant about what you're doing, because once it's there, you cannot take it back. And we know this with social media and others. And of course, we also see, though I'm not studying this, as a lot of researchers in my lab do study this, a lot of addiction is also happening with these technologies. So of course, especially if you're talking about younger brains, developing brains, you really want to be very vigilant with your children in educational environments where developing an addiction, which will lead, of course, to some potentially significant challenges and issues, could be extremely dangerous. So again, as far as you know the cost, that's at least the starting point. But of course, we can continue. I know that we are on the limit of time, but of course, I have much more things to say about, healthier habits. And yeah, happy to continue this conversation further, maybe on LinkedIn or somewhere else.
Thank you. No, really, thanks a lot. And thanks for accepting to share also your personal experience. I think it was really valuable because we are all at the beginning, of navigating those technologies. So it's not easy. Maybe if you have time for one last
Absolutely,
question.
I do have time. I just don't want, I don't know how much on the limit of time there is. So yeah, absolutely.
So maybe last question from Nancy from Philadelphia, who is asking, this might be a basic question, but is brain connectivity in itself a good thing or is it a neutral thing, especially when we consider using AI for day-to-day mundane work activities? Also, would lack of connectivity cause some kind of atrophy in the brain over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I explained in the beginning, but just gonna re-explain it really quickly again. So in itself, connectivity doesn't do and doesn't show measure anything bad, good, or ugly. This is really just a measure to understand, as I said in the beginning, what happens in the brain when you are doing the task. So we didn't come with this concept ourselves. It's a very well studied concept. So consider like what is, we just want to understand what is happening. Like, is there more activation here or here, right? More activation here or there. Literally, that's what it is about, right? What it does show to us that because we obviously, and again, the paper has all of these details, right? It's pretty extensive. What can potentially mean, right? For example, for creativity, for imagination, for episodic memory, because we saw some of those to be less, active. So it doesn't mean that they atrophied by no means, right? The experiment even cannot show this because atrophy would happen over time, longer than the study took place. But what it does is that we show that, hey, well, this, interesting enough, like language center was not actually that active here. It was more active there. I'm going to give you a specific example just to help navigate this. If you take search engine, right, something that I guess everyone right by now is really used to use, right? So in search engine, in our paper, we actually show, as a lot of other papers before us, that paper, your brain on Google actually showed the same thing in other papers. So it's back of the head, visual cortex. It's also called occipital cortex. It actually shows a lot of this connectivity, so a lot of activations. And why is it so? Because, well, imagine you are right now having Google open, like in front of me, and you have multiple tabs, right? So you need to click on those tabs, like go through information, incorporate this information. So that's why you see these activations there, right? So this is an example, just giving you so everyone had experienced this, right? This is an example of information we measured and we found, right? It's early to say, oh, definitely language will be atrophied, but I'm going to give you and leave you with maybe one example, very specific, right? Children development is something that I'm not doing like on an expert level. Of course, I read papers. I have several papers that related to BCI, so brain-computer interfaces and children use, but I don't do children brain development. There's a lot of experts that actually reached out, but in a nutshell, you might have heard, especially if you're in Philadelphia, a person who is asking, right? And of course, even if you are not, you might have heard a press reported several months ago this year, OpenAI and Mattel. Mattel is a company that produces toys like Barbie, actually reported a partnership. Partnership is for 13-year-olds, limit on the age. So it's not for young children, so it's for teenagers, but still pretty young. And they obviously didn't talk about details, right? So it's hard to speculate, and I don't want to go in speculation. So I'm going to leave this press release as it is. But the moment I saw this, and a lot of people were very critical, a lot of people who are actually in children development were very critical, but I immediately thought one thing, right? I remember when I was 7 and I had Barbies. I had a lot of Barbies, to be super honest. And I think I would totally jump to the moon if my Barbies were stupid Barbies means that they did not have any smart sensors, but I loved them to the bits. They were the best toys, and I still think these are really some of the best toys I had, which are toys where I came up with conversations for my Barbies. They had like whole tea party situations and all other activities. In my head, I came up with conversations, and then of course I role played it, right? So they were talking to each other. It was all crazy 75 roles. So you might know what I'm talking about here. But think about it. If you're taking now this Barbie and it talks back to you, how much it would be great to measure, right? How much of language development is maybe being enhanced, or is it actually suffering? Because I came up with all of those conversations. Of course, it was also from my parents, from school, from TV. Back it was VHS tapes, so no, not even DVDs yet. So I was, of course, picking up this vocabulary from somewhere. I didn't just randomly came up with it, right? Books, paper books. But now if it actually always in front of me talking to me, then there is a risk that I might actually lose on this storytelling ability first thing, because it's gonna tell stories for me, which is like in itself sounds great, right? But is it really great? Like the question is, did they do a study? Do they have objective data? Do they have recommendations where it can be awesome and great, like learning? I think that's what they were mentioned in the press release. But they never did any study, right? So do we know and suggest, okay, for 13 years old it's good, for 7 we should definitely not use it. In this use case, if a child has, this need, or they actually love this, would be great to use it, but just 30 minutes a day tops, and it should never do this and this and that. No, there is nothing about that. And again, I don't want to speculate. They haven't released the product yet, but it's again back to the point. First, we are getting the product that has been pushed on us, and only then we are getting, oh, we ran a study, or scientists, someone like ourselves went and did a study and said, hey, maybe not so fast, right? So this is what we are about, right? Understanding what happens to our brain, but we need to understand it at the moment of inception of these toys, before we just release them and then, oh, well, what's happening? Less words are being pronounced and learned, right? And oh, look, all of these words are actually the common used by an LLM, etc. What do we do now? So that's the whole idea, right? It's not an atrophy right now, but it might very well be one, especially if they introduced absolutely without any thinking to the brains that are really just being developed, as this example I just gave.
Super interesting. And I really love this idea that in the silence of our toys, in this case of our environment, we also have the space to express ourselves, to create, and to elevate some.
Not everything needs to be smart. Like we have smartphones, smart homes, not everything needs to be smart. And some of maybe things that are the closest to us, right? Like for example, I'm very close to my coffee maker machine. Like I'm very, very close to this. I don't need it to ask for my mood, or for, I want it to make coffee. Its goal and purpose is to make coffee. I want it to stay as dumb as it can, because I don't need my 7 a.m. talk. I have my husband for that, literally another human live being. And that's exactly that, right? And that's why it is so important, like to understand that some stuff needs to stay dumb, in that sense of no sensors, no smart stuff. And again, in some cases, it might be very beneficial. There are studies showing, a possibility of talking for older adults might be extremely beneficial. We have a couple of papers now being mentioned in preprints. So it doesn't mean that it's all one thing fits all for everyone, or for all use cases and all for all categories. But I also do believe that some toys need to stay dumb, right? And it's great then to have some smart toys and, etc. But that's exactly where, this ability to create, to come up, also this desire to be someone or something actually comes from. And I think that is something we definitely don't want to kill. And of course, we are right now en route to do that, as we did with social media. But social media train fully left, and we are still, grasping with the consequences. Here, we still have things to stop, to pause, not to really implement right as they come, and because our government decided to sign a contract, we have an opportunity to say no. Let's study first, let's get data objectively, because we're not saying no to a tool, we are saying no, let's don't push it on us before we actually have more data. And once we have more data, we obviously can then make informed decisions why it's great, why it's not that great, why it's better not, and why it's not at all, just not at all. And these would be great to keep eye on and actually develop and update as the technology also is getting updated.
Yes, as you said, knowing the costs, knowing the benefits, so that we can all make the right or actually our own trade-off.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks a lot, really, Natalia. That was a fascinating conversation full of wisdom, insight. We will, I think, need to have to do another conversation because I really wanted
Absolutely.
to
I mean,
speak.
no, I know that you also wanted to speak about more urban, like, and actually this slide that I showed the last actually was not the last slide. I actually had, as I told you, a video. I just cut it full on that video, so it doesn't have it. And actually it had several slides also specifically about the cityscapes and BCI work
Oh,
that I'm doing. But I just realized for the time's sake and to have a conversation, maybe next time I will be more than happy to come back and talk
let's
specifically about the cityscape, because there's a lot of things to consider on the city science and also the work that I have been doing and also colleagues have been doing throughout the years, on the literally on the urban scape of the technology.
Okay, well, that's a full deal. Let's do another
Yeah.
conversation on this topic and your research on this topic for sure. Thanks a lot, really, Natalia, for this conversation. An article will be posted on our blog next week, and next week our next conversation will be dedicated to AI and skin-to-skin architecture, also related actually to some of those topics. Thanks, everyone, and take care. Bye,
Thank
Natalia.
you.